Sergeant Kyle Benson walked slowly past a bustling coffee shop in the heart of San Diego, the morning sun casting long shadows across the sidewalk. His limp was pronounced but steady, a reflection of battles fought and sacrifices made. His service cap was faded, the fabric worn thin by time and memory. His jacket bore the marks of service, patches sewn on with care, medals dulled but still gleaming with pride. Though age and injury had taken a toll on his body, nothing could touch the dignity in his posture. He was a man who had given everything for his country. At a table outside the café, a group of sharply dressed men laughed boisterously, sipping their expensive coffees. Their polished boots and proud tattoos marked them as former Navy SEALs. At first, they simply watched Kyle pass. Then, one of them nudged another, and the laughter grew louder, mocking, cruel. They joked about his limp, his uniform, his outdated look. "Dinosaur Marine," one of them sneered. Their voices carried, but no one inside the café said a word. Some glanced uncomfortably toward the door, then looked away. Others acted like they hadn't heard anything at all. Kyle didn't flinch. He had faced far worse in deserts and war zones. He walked past them as if their words didn't touch him, his eyes fixed on something beyond the moment, something bigger than the ignorance behind him. His pride wasn't shaken, because it didn't come from applause or approval. It came from a lifetime of honor, of service, of doing what was right even when no one was watching. The people at the café watched him disappear into the distance, the rhythm of his cane tapping softly against the pavement. There was a strange silence in the air now, an unspoken discomfort. The laughter had died down, and something about Kyle's calm composure had left an impression that words couldn't erase. What none of them knew was that this brief moment of mockery would ripple far beyond the morning crowd. Someone across the street had seen everything, and the response that was about to unfold would leave those men, and everyone around them, forever changed. In that quiet walk, Kyle had already begun teaching a lesson without saying a single word. Across the street from the bustling café, an old, dusty pickup truck sat parked in front of a quiet diner. Inside, behind the wheel, sat Mrs. Langston, a silver-haired woman in her late 60s, dressed in a faded cardigan and holding a photo in her lap. Her eyes had grown soft with age, but in that moment, they were sharp and focused on the scene unfolding across the street. She had just watched the disabled Marine walk by, his limp steady, his shoulders squared with quiet dignity, as laughter erupted from a group of men seated outside the café. As the men mocked him, something inside her stirred. Her hand trembled slightly as she touched the photo, her only son, Corporal James Langston, smiling in uniform. He had gone to war and never come back. Watching Sergeant Kyle Benson walk past those jeering men, she saw the same fire in his eyes that her son once had. It wasn't just a limp she noticed, it was the weight of sacrifice, worn not with shame, but honor. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the deep ache of recognition. She saw in Kyle a symbol of every soldier who had given a part of themselves and received too little in return. She couldn't just sit there. Without hesitation, Mrs. Langston opened her door, the creak of rusted hinges cutting through the morning air. She stepped out, straightened her back, and looked both ways before crossing the street, her every step filled with purpose. Her worn shoes tapped softly against the pavement as she made her way toward the café. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with conviction. She pushed open the café door and entered with the quiet force of a storm. The laughter had died down by now, but the sting of it still lingered in the air. She walked past the counter, past the stunned customers, and headed straight toward the table where the ex-SEALs sat. Though she was just a grieving mother, in that moment, she carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. She wasn't there to argue or to shame, she was there to remind them of what respect looked like, of what sacrifice truly meant. And she wasn't leaving without being heard. The café buzzed with uneasy silence as Mrs. Langston stood firmly in front of the table. The SEALs had been laughing just moments before, but now their grins faded into smirks of disbelief, unsure if the elderly woman was serious. She stared at them with tear-filled eyes that still held fire. "You think that limp makes him weak?" she asked, her voice trembling but steady with purpose. "That limp tells a story of sacrifice you clearly forgot." A few of them looked down at their drinks, embarrassed but unwilling to admit it. One scoffed under his breath, but no one laughed this time. Then, the café door flew open with a loud creak, and heads turned. A group of men in fresh, crisp uniforms entered, active-duty Navy SEALs. Their presence shifted the energy in the room instantly. Among them stood Commander Reyes, tall, composed, and built like someone who had seen more war than rest. He walked past the line of booths and tables without a word, until he stood beside Mrs. Langston. He removed his cap, looked the seated men in the eye, and said, "We don't mock our own. Not ever." The air felt charged. The seated SEALs stiffened in their chairs. Reyes turned to the front of the café, where a quiet presence was making its way in. Sergeant Kyle Benson had returned, his head still held high, having been called back by the barista who had seen everything and had enough. Reyes looked at Kyle, then back at the table. His voice lowered, but his words hit with the force of truth. "Sergeant Benson saved my life in Afghanistan. Twice. First with a tourniquet when I was bleeding out. Second, when he carried me 2 miles under fire after being hit himself." The café went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. The once mocking SEALs looked as though they'd been punched in the gut. All the bravado drained from their faces as reality hit them harder than any battlefield. Here was a man they'd ridiculed, who had endured more than they ever would, and standing next to him was a commander who owed him his life. And in that moment, it became clear, their laughter had mocked not just a man, but everything they once swore to stand for. The café remained still, every pair of eyes fixed on the quiet, weathered Marine standing near the entrance. The once loud table of XSEALs now sat in shameful silence, their bravado dissolved under the weight of truth. One of them, the youngest, slowly stood up. His voice, once filled with arrogance, now trembled with humility. "We were wrong," he said, looking directly at Kyle. "We got too comfortable. We forgot what men like you gave us." Kyle looked at him, not with anger, not with pride, but with the calm steadiness of someone who had long understood the burden of sacrifice. He gave a small, respectful nod. "I didn't serve for praise," Kyle replied softly, "I served so we could all sit here safely. Even you." Those words hung in the air like a sacred vow. It wasn't bitterness in his tone, it was truth. Simple, honest, and powerful enough to pierce every heart in the room. Mrs. Langston wiped a tear from her cheek and stepped closer to Kyle. Her voice cracked, but her spirit was strong. "You're exactly what this country needs more of," she said. "Not just soldiers, but reminders of what courage, humility, and honor really look like." A few patrons clapped softly, then others joined, until the whole café echoed with heartfelt applause. Not for a performance, but for a man whose quiet strength had reminded them of something they didn't know they had forgotten. And for the first time that morning, Kyle smiled, not for recognition, but because he knew he had made a difference, simply by walking with dignity. Days later, beneath a clear blue sky in a local San Diego park, rows of American flags waved gently in the breeze. A crowd had gathered, veterans, families, students, and citizens from every walk of life. A banner read, "Veterans Appreciation Day, honoring our heroes," and at the heart of it all stood a modest wooden stage. Among the volunteers helping set up were the same men who had once laughed at Sergeant Kyle Benson. Now, they moved with quiet purpose, humbled by their own mistake. Their arrogance had been replaced with something deeper, gratitude, and the understanding that true strength doesn't shout, it stands tall in silence. Kyle was invited as the guest of honor. Dressed in his same patched uniform, medals polished but still slightly rusted, he stood with the same calm dignity that had once drawn mocking laughs. Now, it drew reverence. He stepped up to the microphone. The crowd stilled. His voice, though soft, carried strength. "Respect isn't just for the battlefield," he said, scanning the crowd with clear, steady eyes. "It's how we treat each other every day. In coffee shops. On sidewalks. In our homes. Let's not forget the quiet heroes walking beside us, those who serve, those who sacrifice, and those who carry invisible wounds. They don't ask for applause. But they deserve our honor." There was a pause, heavy, emotional, sacred. Then the applause came. It started with a few, then swept across the park like a wave. People stood, many with hands over hearts, others wiping away tears. Kyle didn't raise his hands or bow. He simply stepped back, nodded once, and walked off stage the way he always had, quietly, with strength and humility. That day, he didn't walk away with new medals or honors. He walked away with something far greater. A nation's heart finally reminded of what it means to truly serve.